Hi, everyone. It's awesome to be here. So I'm going to talk about iterated fact sheets and fact pages with R Markdown. This is a process that we use at the Urban Institute. If you're following along at home, my Twitter handle is AW Underground, and also all of my slides today are available on my GitHub page, which is also under AW Underground. So first, I want to start by giving you a little background on the Urban Institute, because I think it's important to understand the problem that we were trying to solve and our ultimate solution. So the Urban Institute is a collection of 300 researchers, about 575 employees. We just celebrated our 50th anniversary, and our main focus is analysis of public policy. And across the Institute, we're broken up into different teams. So I deal mostly with retirement issues and tax issues, but we have people that look at education policy, justice policy, health policy. Our mission is to open minds, shape decisions, and offer solutions through economic and social policy research. And our objective research helps expand opportunities for all, reduce hardship among the most vulnerable, and strengthen the effectiveness of the public sector. Just sort of make that concrete, I'll offer a few examples here. Every 4 years, the Tax Policy Center does high-profile analyses of presidential candidate tax plans that you can read about in major publications. The Health Policy Center does a lot of analyses of insurance coverage. And in fact, Chief Justice John Roberts cited one of our reports in his decision that ended up, King versus Burwell, which ended up upholding the Affordable Care Act. We were pioneers of paired testing, which looks at housing discrimination, and a type of model that I work on, microsimulation, which does distributional analyses. So our main objective is to do impartial objective research and get that into the hands of decision makers. Oftentimes that can mean getting it into the hands of people here in Washington, DC, on Capitol Hill, and the different agencies of the federal government. But often it also means trying to get that information into the hands of decision makers in state capitals, in mayor's offices across the country, at key nonprofits and communities across the country. Now, I love big reports, big PDF reports. They're foundational to what we do. I think it's important to have, one document that is comprehensive, that covers the methodology, the literature review, and everything. But a little too often, I think our reports end up looking like this in a time when our attention spans are optimized for something like this. So I'll pause for XKCD here. So my original idea was, let's make economic and social policy comic strips, but that was quickly shot down by the decision makers. And so my second idea was we can make iterated fact sheets and web pages using R Markdown. So what does this look like? We have 3 goals, I think, with these sort of fact sheet products. The first one is we want them to be targeted and brief. We want them to take a big report that has information maybe about all 50 states and Washington, DC, or has information about all 3,000 or so counties across the country. And we want to sort of package that information so it's state specific or community specific. The second objective is we want them to be visually appealing and branded. So I'm sure some of you work at organizations that have fairly strict branding guidelines. We have a very comprehensive style guide at the Urban Institute with specific information about colors, with specific information about text sizes, text styles, where things should go in different data visualizations. And the third thing is we want something that's not labor intensive. So it's certainly possible to make fact sheets and fact pages by hand, but that can be labor intensive. And so someone has to sit there and point and click and point and click and point and click. If somehow in the review process, one word gets changed, they have to go back into all 51 documents or all however many documents and make all those changes by hand. Definitely trying to avoid having anyone have to suffer through that. So what we ended up coming up with are these PDF county fact sheets, which we've done by state and county, and now state fact pages. So I'll just show you 3 examples. The first is a state-by-state look at the demographic characteristics of the children of immigrants in this country. So we can just go to any state we want, pick Missouri. So we end up with a 2-page fact sheet that's customized to the data and situation of that state. We have visualizations that are made in ggplot2 with a 2-column layout, just like this. We did a similar project looking at access to opioid treatment in different counties in California. This is obviously a very important and timely issue. So we have a very similar map. You can go in, you can pick a county. We also have a drop-down menu here. One thing I like about this fact sheet is it's very visual, it's very concise on the first page, and then we convince the researchers to put sort of the methodology in the second page. And so we have one of these that's custom to every single county in the state of California. The third project we did with the State and Local Finance Initiative, and these are sort of fiscal briefs on every single state in the District of Columbia. What's different this time is instead of making PDFs, we made individual web pages for each state in the District of Columbia. So they're not as printable, but it's obviously a much better experience to be in the web browser. The links are better. You're still sort of in the website as it is here, and you have access to all the data visualizations and tables and whatnot. All right, so how do we make this happen? Hopefully everyone here is familiar with R Markdown by now. It's an incredibly powerful tool that I use for reports, for making websites. I use BlogDown for corresponding with different collaborators and projects. It's an incredibly flexible tool. Just to recap though, the main idea is you're gonna have a .rmd document that allows you to combine text and images, formatted text and images, code, and the output of that code into one document. And so this document, when you click knit, it goes through a series of processes as outlined by this image from R for Data Science. And when you get to the end here, you can make sort of any type of output document that you want. So in our case, there's sort of three ingredients that go into these iterated fact sheets or fact pages. The first one's going to be a data structure. The second one is going to be a parameterized .rmd template. And the third one is going to be an iterating script. And what this iterating script is going to do is it's going to take that template from part 2 and iterate it over each observation from part 1. So here I just have an example. This is the first 8 rows of a state data set. So basically we're going to make state fact sheets here. You have 1 row per fact sheet, 1 for Alabama, Alaska, so on and on. That second ingredient is going to be a parameterized .rmd template. And the idea here is with R Markdown, you can specify parameters in the YAML header like this. And so I'm specifying 2 parameters here. One is state and the other one is year. And so when we do this, if lower down in the document in an R section, we say params $state, R is going to read that as being Alabama in quotation marks. So we can use this in 2 different ways. The first thing we'll do, the very top of our template, is we're going to filter that data structure down to just the observation or observations related to the current fact sheet we're making. So this is going to take that original data structure from 51 observations down to just 1 observation for Alabama. The second thing it's going to allow us to do is refer to that params object within the document. So what does this give us? It means that we can use data $variable to refer to the variable of interest specifically for Alabama or for whichever state we care about. And then we can use params $parameter throughout the document. So a line of text like this right here, there were R data $fatality, traffic fatalities, and R params $state and R params $year. When you knit the document, evaluates to something like there were 1,038 traffic fatalities in Alabama in 2016. All right, so that gets us the sort of changing text within our document. One of the great things, or maybe the best thing about working in R Markdown, is that you can easily add ggplot2 data visualizations. At the Urban Institute, we have our own package that handles ggplot2 themes that make data visualizations look like they're from the Urban Institute. We have another package that makes creating state and county maps a really simple process. So that gets us branded data visualizations. The third and probably trickiest part of this is making the actual output documents branded. And we've done that in 2 different ways. So the first one is we've used LaTeX for PDFs. It is the case that you can make PDFs with R Markdown without actually using any LaTeX, just using R Markdown, or sorry, just Markdown code rather. But we found that we didn't have enough control over the styles to meet the Institute's branding standards. So what we created was a preamble.tech that anyone can include in the header of their document. It controls general document styles. It also creates several LaTeX macros rather, where you can wrap text in those macros and it will style it like a title. It will style it as if it's a boilerplate. It'll style it as a subtitle, authors, on and on. The process is definitely a lot easier for HTML documents. For that, we can just use CSS. So we have a styles.css that people can include in their YAML header, and it will make things look like they're from the Urban Institute. And we're using this in two ways. The first one is we've created HTML documents, but in the long run, our goal is to actually knit to .md and then pass that MD straight into the Urban Institute CMS. So that's sort of the long-term vision. Right now, the CMS manager actually has to copy that HTML into the CMS. The third step is we have this iterating script. So with parts 1 and 2, we could certainly change the parameter in the YAML header, click knit, change the parameter in the YAML header, click knit, do that 51 times or do that 3,000 times for counties. But instead, our Markdown actually has this render function, which does the same thing as clicking that knit button. So first, we're going to create a data structure. I called it runs here. It's going to have the output file names. This is what we want the names of the .pdf or of the .html to be once they're knit. And then we're going to create a list column that has the different parameters that we want for each output file. In this case, it's just state name. Then we're going to use pwalk from the per package. It's going to take that runs data structure. It's going to call render on each row. The input is going to be the template that we created in step 2. And then in this case, it's going to put all 51 outputs into a directory called fact sheets. Just as a sidebar, a little tip here, when I've collaborated with these, with other researchers on these projects in the past, they're really tempted to put NA in their YAML header. If you put NA in your YAML header, you won't necessarily be able to knit the individual fact sheets. You can go ahead and put whatever values you want in there. When you call render, it'll overwrite them, whether they're NA values or if they're character strings or anything. So this allows you to sort of practice developing your document one at a time, and then you can go ahead and knit the whole thing without any problems. So we've put this code on our GitHub repository. We have one repository for the LaTeX fact sheets where we talk through all the macros. We have another repository that talks about the HTML fact sheets. Please feel free to go in those. Feel free to take the code and use it and change it for your own organization. Please let us know that you're doing that. And if you learn anything, please pass it back. We certainly want to continue improving this process. All right, so just to give you a view, sort of the 500-foot view of what this looks like at the Urban Institute, the first thing we do is we have a conversation about why fact sheets. Just because we can make fact sheets doesn't mean that it's the most effective way to disseminate information for every single project. And the key question here is, who do we want to get this information into the hands of, right? Is it specifically state attorney generals? Is it specifically state legislators? Is it specifically, whoever's in charge of United Way in all communities? That's the first thing I think you need to do is answer that question. If we're collaborating, our collaborators, we oftentimes create sort of a mock-up in Microsoft Word or Google Doc. We first recreate that template for one iteration, right? So at this point, we're still clicking knit. Then finally, we iterate that our Markdown document for all of the communities of interest. We go through a quality control process where people review the language and the numbers within the documents. And then we create a home for the fact sheets. So that's that state and county maps that I showed you in the earlier examples, a way that we can host these on our website. So when I first tried to convince people to do this at the Urban Institute, I thought it would go okay, but I didn't have a sense as to how well it would go. There's been a few takeaways. The first one is because we're creating these output documents programmatically, they're incredibly visually consistent, right? If you're doing something by hand, this element gets dragged over here a little bit, that element gets, over here, and you lose some of that visual consistency. In this case, they're incredibly visually consistent. They're also really accurate. So if you imagine making 51 fact sheets by hand, and each fact sheet has 30 numbers, you're doing hundreds, thousands of transcriptions by hand. We're all fallible, errors happen. By doing this with code, you eliminate or greatly reduce the risk of those transcription errors. And the third thing is they're incredibly easy to update. So for several of these projects, we're now in the second year. The researchers get new data. They plug in that new data. They're already 75, 80% of the way to having a new set of fact sheets. And in fact, that third example that I showed you where we have the fact pages on the website, originally the plan was to update the files every single year. They now update about quarterly because it's so easy. One thing with that is if you work at a big organization and you're creating lots of fact sheets really frequently, you may upset the person in charge of the CMS. But in our case, we were able to have a conversation with them. When you knit to .html, it actually includes a lot of embedded CSS and JavaScript code that's unnecessary. We just wrote an R function that parses down that HTML output document to just the important parts. And so it's a much easier process to update it. And in the long run, we want to knit to Markdown so that we can automate the process of actually just putting the Markdown straight into our CMS. So if you're interested in learning more, we have a blog at the Urban Institute called Data at Urban. It's sort of our behind the scenes data blog. There's 2 blog posts in there about iterating these fact sheets. There's lots of information, interesting information in there too about modeling, how we use APIs to disseminate information, our cloud computing architecture and whatnot. So I'm happy to answer any questions with the remaining time here. Also, if you can just email me at awilliams@urban.org with questions or reach out to me on Twitter. I'm happy to help. And also, I'm always happy to hear feedback. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aaron. So we have one question. How did you save the versions for each R package used in the project? Curious if it was a separate text file or if you use a package structure.
Oh, for the actual output? So they literally go into, let me go back to the code here. Sorry, Zoom seems like Zoom. Here we go. So they just simply go into whatever directory you want. So in this case here, usually what I'll end up with is alabama.html, alaska.html, and it will be in a directory within the directory structure of my R project.
So it comes out as like an R project structure.
Yeah, it's a subdirectory below where the R project is. And you can call this whatever you want it to be. I just call it fact sheets. And you can call the output documents whatever you want them to be. That's just handled here when you're creating this data structure.